Good morning, Year 11s. Probably the most important skill for any practitioner in the law, whether you are a legal studies student, whether you're a tertiary law student, whether you're an article clerk or a researcher or an associate, whether you're a lawyer, be it solicitor or barrister, whether you work as an academic, or even on the bench. The most important skill is the ability to be able to read legal documents and to be able to understand them, and most importantly to be able to use them. And so legal research is very important for us, and of course that is at the core of the inquiry report that we are currently doing. And so to start off this morning's lesson, I want to take you through some skills that you need to use one particular tool, and that's the AustLII, the Australian Legal Information Institute databases, and try to relate it to how you will use it specifically for your inquiry report. Now, AustLII is a very, very powerful tool, and it has been around for many, many years. And what it helps take the place for you is to avoid having to do the legwork, and I mean literally legwork, that used to be required of legal researchers to walk their way around law libraries, and sometimes more than one law library, depending on how comprehensive the collection that a particular law library would have, in order to find the information that you need to be able to mount a particular argument, or to provide advice, or to be able to answer certain questions, just as you're trying to do for your assessment. So what are our aims today? Okay, we want you to be able to understand how to use AustLII to search for legal information, to analyse the credibility and usefulness of legal sources, and that's an ongoing process, and to be able to identify information to use in research inquiry. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to open up a browser and enter that address. So you can just simply start with the W's, www.austlii.edu.au. Make sure you note that that's an LII. And as I go through a demonstration, if you could have the browser opened on the side, because as I show you something, I'd also like you to be doing. Now, it's a very comprehensive database, and we'll just go over some of the things that you will be able to find whilst using it. So one of the first things is Acts of Parliament, and because it's comprehensive, it also includes historical and repealed acts. What that means is, as an Act of Parliament is updated, if you just simply got the current Act, you might not be able to tell what it used to be in previous forms, because sections will be updated and sometimes they're reworded, sections taken out, words added in, words changed around. That is the natural course of a piece of legislation. And sometimes it's necessary to actually go back and be able to see, what did this act used to be? So if we take something like the Criminal Code, which was first passed in 1899, it has gone through countless numbers of updates, and you can use AustLII to actually go back and check out each and every one of them, which sounds like a very exciting thing to do on a Saturday night when you don't have anything else to do. Not really. You can also access bills, so hopefully we know that a bill is a proposed act before it has been passed by the Parliament and given royal assent. So what we'll do is actually get you giving it a go. So why don't we locate the Criminal Code 1899 Queensland, and what I'm going to do is let you have a go at that first, and then I'll show you how to do it, because one of the beauties of AustLII, but also one of its downfalls, is that there are many ways to get to the same place, and some of those ways are a bit more effective than others. So if you can pause the video at the moment and then give that a go. Now hopefully you're back, and what I'll get you to do is look for another piece of legislation, and the reason we're getting both of these is because they will be relevant for today's lesson. The next one we'd like you to find is the Penalties and Sentences Act of 1992. Now these are both Queensland acts, so don't get them confused with any other ones. And pause the video while you find that. Okay, so hopefully you found that. So what I'll do now is I will hopefully demonstrate how to do that for you, just in case you had any problems. So when you went to the URL that I had up on the screen, this is what you should have been presented with. Now, as I said, one of the beauties of AustLII is that some of it seems intuitive, but also because it is so comprehensive, it can actually get you bogged down a little bit. Okay, so there are the different ways that you can do things. Now you can either go straight out for a search all databases, okay, and we can just simply do a plain text search. So we could say Criminal Code 1899 Queensland. We can try our luck and see how that goes. Okay, and what we find is we actually get a lot of hits back, and it'll tell you up here exactly how many hits you get. 3,856. Now that's not really what we were looking for, is it? We actually wanted to get the act itself, didn't we? So what you can do is, once you've typed that in, you could go to this red bar here and you could choose Cases and Legislation. Oh, sorry, that you actually do that back from the main window. So when you're in AustLII, you can always click on the icon that will take you back to the home page. We can go Cases and Legislation. Okay, we don't want all jurisdictions, we want Queensland. Okay, and you notice that it's got case law, but then also legislation on this side. So what you can do is then you go to Queensland Consolidated Acts. So when you're looking for an act that is currently in force, an act as it stands at the moment, then what you're looking for is Consolidated Acts. So that's why it's at the top of the list. Now what you notice is, as it turns out, it is the most accessed search in the database under this particular database. But just to make sure that we do search it properly, now that we're in, you can see here we're looking at legislation, Queensland Consolidated Acts, and you can either go looking up by letter and you can search through all the C's, or in this database now you can do your search for Criminal Code 1899 Queensland. Okay, now you're going to get a few other acts that are going to go along with it, because you have a lot of associated legislation that goes along with that. Okay, so you can see there's quite a few. Lots of sections and amendments. What we can do is we can go back to our Queensland Consolidated Acts. It's a little bit slow to react. Okay, just got a bit of a freeze on the database at the moment, so I'm just going to try going back to the start again. There we go, and I can get it from there. Okay, and it's a fairly handy layout for researching, because what you can do is you can quickly find the section that you're looking for and you can go straight to it. So if I want to talk about intoxication, I can click on that and it's going to take me right to the relevant section. Now, when you get what you're looking for, you can go over the side here and you can do things like you can print if you want. And what it's going to do is it's going to print what you've got in front of you. Or if you want to download that, you can say this, plain text. It's going to ask you which sort of format, but you've actually only got one choice in this case. Now you can see that this is quite literally plain text, and it's not very nice to look at. With some of the legislation and some of the reports that we're going to look at, you actually do get the option for a PDF download, which is a bit more presentable and maybe a little bit more usable in some cases. So I'm also going to show you another option for you other than AustLII. So some of the AustLII sections are going to be fine and they look really nice, but in this case the Queensland Criminal Code, probably because it's so old, that this was one of the first bits of legislation they had to digitise and get into this format. Once upon a time, in its very early manifestations, AustLII was essentially just showing us digitised copies of the paper versions. So when you looked things up, you needed to actually read what were essentially scanned copies of the paper versions. Okay, this has now been digitised and also checked and rechecked and everything, and so because of the massive legislation, some of these older ones are in very crude and rudimentary forms. But if you want to actually look at the criminal code a little bit more, I suppose, nice, for want of a better term, is we can actually go to the site which is provided to us by the Queensland Government. So what we do is the Queensland Government have their legislation website, and that address up there you can see in the URL is just www.legislation.queensland.gov.au, and it will give us very similar access that AustLII does, but you'll find out that it actually turns out to be a little bit nicer. So what we want to go to is enforce legislation. Okay, and you can look by year or you can look alphabetically. So we're going to go C. Remember, this is now limited to Queensland, so I can just go through alphabetically and I can find the Criminal Code Act 1899. Now the advantage is that this is the legislation in force, okay, as opposed to, see down the bottom here, it talks about subordinate legislation, which is all those other acts that sit underneath it. So by going to this one, so I just have to find it again, get my alphabet correct. Criminal Code Act 1899. You can see it actually looks a bit nicer in here. Okay, and you've got all these search links on the left to get to parts a lot more quickly, and you've got the option to view it as a PDF up there if you want to be saving it on your machine. Now, for your research, you don't really need to go saving large sections of it, because as long as you've got access to these sites, you're able to get all the information that you need. Now, one of the advantages of AustLII, okay, is that when we look at journals later on, it's going to help us with our citations. Okay, now the other one that we wanted to find was the Penalties and Sentences Act. Okay, so we can do the same sort of thing. We can go Queensland legislation, consolidated acts. We can go to P. Okay, and we know that it's actually a bit easier to find. We don't even need to go in to do a search. So this is what we call browsing as opposed to searching. And we get to the Penalties and Sentences Act. Okay, and later in the lesson we're going to be looking at the sentencing guidelines. So for you to be able to find those will be helpful. Okay, so let's go back to our home there. Rightio, now the next bit in the lesson that we'd like to show you is talk about case law. So how can we find cases? So you can search for a specific case or you can search by topic. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you now, rather than get you to do it first, but if you can do it along with me, we're going to look for a particular case so we know from something that we've read, it mentioned a case called Hookey and Anor versus Whitelaw and others. Okay, and it was heard in the Supreme Court in April this year. So what we do is we go back to AustLII. Okay, and this time we're going cases, Queensland again. Now it said it was in the Supreme Court, so what we can do is we can go here, Supreme Court of Queensland. And look, up in the most recent, I can see Hookey and Anor versus Manthe and others. Oh, but hang on, that's not the one we're looking for, is it? We were looking for Whitelaw. So what's Hookey been up to? He's got more than one case on the go. And when was this one? This one was this year as well. Okay, now we can either go searching alphabetically, or this is where we can put our search in. Now what we can probably do is we don't have to go putting in all the anors and everything. We put the name of the two parties that we're looking for. That's most often the best way to search for cases. So I just go Hookey Whitelaw, and look at that, I get one. So it's from 7th of April. Okay, QSC, which is Queensland Supreme Court reports, and there's going to be our report. Okay, and you can see over here we've got a couple of different options this time for the report. We can download it into RTF, which is like a Word document, so it's called rich text format, or a signed PDF document. Okay, which means that you can't then edit it. Okay, so that's if we want to get a case. Let's go back home. Now the next one we want to look up is, let's locate a report of the most recent Court of Appeal case involving fraud. So this might be something that you want to do. You're looking at a particular topic and you want to look for recent case law, and we want to see one on appeal. Now why might we want to look at appeal as opposed to the original case? Because appeal cases deal with questions of law a lot more. So the original cases deal with facts and apply the law, whereas in appeal cases we're often really looking at were the procedures followed properly, and so that's often where a lot of the issues that we're interested in might show up. Not all the time, but it's often a case. So let's have a look. So we're going to go cases and legislation again, Queensland. Now we're looking at Court of Appeal this time, so we're going to go Court of Appeal. And what we can do is now go to our search, and we're going to look for something involving fraud. Okay, now by default, when you get your search results back, it's done by relevance. So see here, you get your different types of sorting options. What we want is, we were asked to look for the most recent one, so we want to sort by date. So we change that. Okay, and we can see that there's one here from just a few days ago. Okay, 12th of May. Now that doesn't mean it's actually the last case to be heard, but this is the last one to be reported, because it takes at least a few days to get reports up. They're certainly quicker than they used to be, but yeah, so this isn't necessarily the most recent. Now, in the past, it used to take a lot longer to get reports published because they had to be published in paper. So you'd then be using something like AustLII to look for what were called unreported cases. Now, there's very few cases that are unreported now, because the speed at getting these reports up is a lot faster now. So let's have a look at R and Silver. Let's see what it's about. Okay, and we can see there that, yeah, we can read through and find out more about it. We're not going to do that at the moment, but it's returned a search on fraud, so that might be one that's of interest to us. Okay, now the other type of search that you're very likely going to need to do is legal journals. So AustLII has a comprehensive search facility for all academic law journals in Australia and New Zealand. Now the journals are basically really our secondary sources. So cases and legislation are sort of like the primary sources, and the journals are the secondary. So this is where somebody else has considered these ideas and they've done some analysis of them. So these are very, very useful for us. So let's try and locate the most recent publication that discusses white collar crime. Okay, now I'm not going to limit this one to Queensland. We're going to do it just across all databases. So what we do is we go to journals, this case, journals and scholarship. Now you can either identify the journals if you know specifically the one you're looking for. You can go down the list and look for them. Okay, but we're going to look across journals, and I'm going to put in white collar crime and see what we come up with. Okay, so remember again, by default it's going to be relevance, so we want to make it by date because we want the most recent. Give that a moment to update. Okay, so we see one here that talks about branding corruption as its title. So let's check it out and let's see what it's got. Okay, so this is one where we've got an abstract, which is very, very helpful when we look at a journal, because the abstract is going to give us a bit of a summary of what is in the rest of the document. But one thing that I note here is that that's all we have. So it tells us that there's 25 pages in this journal article, but we only have the abstract and we don't have access to the rest of the document. So this might be useful for us. However, it's only going to be limited. So I make a decision now. Do I bother reading it and making note of it? That may be useful, but what I'm going to do is, because this is pretty quick to just browse backwards and forwards, I'm going to check out the next one and see if it's useful for me and see if there's anything more that's available. And I can see this one gives me 16 pages and I can download it in PDF format, so I can actually read the whole 16 pages of this one. Now, when we're doing journals, what is very important for us to identify is the citation. Okay, so we see the citation up here. Okay, and so the name is this, like that's their full name, but the citation is that little bit there. Now what we see is this one's actually appeared in two different journals. So it's in the Electronic Journal of Tax Reporting, I think is the R, so EJ Tax R 15 from 2019. It's also in the E-Journal of Tax Research. Okay, a slightly different citation there. Okay, you can get lost in AustLII. Okay, you can spend hours and hours. So what we want to be giving you the opportunity to do through this inquiry report is the opportunity to practice that. Okay, to practice research, because you're going to need to be much, much better at it by this time next year. So when you're in year 12 and you're doing the inquiry report as IA2, when it will be sheep stations, it will be very important. We want you to be very good at doing this sort of stuff so that primarily, basically it doesn't waste your time, because one of the biggest risks with research is, one, that you can not get good research, but the second major problem with research is just spending too much time on it. And what you want is to be able to target what you're doing and to be as efficient with your time as possible. Now, being efficient doesn't mean to do it quickly and not do it comprehensively. We want you to be comprehensive, but we also want you to be targeted. So hopefully you get an opportunity now to be able to use AustLII for your inquiry report, okay, to be able to really effectively get good sources, and not only just good sources, but excellent sources that are going to be able to support what you're seeking to do. Okay, so your task this morning is going to be to get started on looking for those 2 bits of legislation that I asked you about, okay, and then we'll get into the rest of the lesson from that. But I just wanted to package this, I suppose, instruction on using AustLII so that you can come back and look at it later on if need be. So I look forward to doing more research with you and to seeing the results of your research. Okay, best